I'm delighted to be in this program because my mind relates back to 2003 or 2002 when I was in Northeast at the instance of Vivekananda Kendra. When this very idea of development with culture, which is the root and the manifestation of Atmanirbhar Bharat, was discussed extensively over my entire visit with different people, including academics, our own Karyakartas and community leaders. I know Balkishanji is also with us, is the president of Vivekananda Kendra, and Dovalji, who has been a gift not only for India but also for Vivekananda Kendra and Vivekananda International Foundation, laid out beautifully and in a very systematic and accurate manner the position of Northeast and India, which only he could have done because his knowledge is something immeasurable. His personal involvement in Northeast is not to be repeated by anyone. And Nivedita laid out the background to Vivekananda Kendra's involvement in Northeast. And of course, Vivekananda Kendra's larger understanding and position in India. And my respects to all of them and also to the thousands of Kendra Karyakartas and others who are witnessing this webinar. And I particularly acknowledge Banuji, who initiated this program, and other important leaders of Vivekananda Kendra. You know, when we think of Atmanirbhar Bharat and Northeast, these are all ideas, particularly Atmanirbhar Bharat, has been one of the driving forces of many of us. But Atmanirbhar Bharat as an idea is a text. No text can be relevant without a context for that. Any idea is a seed idea, but when it sprouts and becomes a huge tree and multiplies itself and becomes a huge forest, then it acquires power, shape, life, and that is how seed ideas grow. So, the context for the text of Atmanirbhar today is the changing world order because of COVID. It's a totally unrelated phenomenon, a total accident, which has made every country realize that the way we have been handling ourselves for the last 100 years is without foundation. In fact, being someone familiar with economics and also with culture, value systems, philosophy, I happen to relate economics and culture very naturally. I am not a student of economics in the sense of economics being a product of mathematics. I always saw the intense relationship between economics and culture. Because of that, many people thought my economics is an outdated idea and it has no value in the contemporary world. But I am surprised the foremost exponent of economics in the world, in the sense in which economists cannot refuse, and which carries the mandate of the entire economic community of the world, is the Economist magazine. And I will read out what the Economist magazine, dated 3rd September 2020, says. Economists are turning to culture to explain economics. 100 years, culture was absent in economics. Religion was absent in the world. Philosophy had evaporated in the world. Who admits this? It is the Harvard University Religious Pluralism Project, which recalls Swami Vivekananda's speech in 1893 and the media reports which appeared at that time. In 1994, 100 years later, that we have missed out on this perspective of a universal religion. In the process, we allowed religion to proliferate differences, battles, and you know what havoc religion has caused and religious ideologies have caused in the last 100 years, to overcome which we brought ultra materialism, which created even greater havoc. So, the idea of Atmanirbhar is an Indian idea, but it is applicable to the whole world, all communities, all nations. That is where the world is diverse. You cannot have one size fit all model, either in economics, or in religion, or in politics, or in culture. So, our ancients recognized diversity in the most diverse sense of the term. It was not only in plants, in animals, in ecosystems, it is in the mind. So, the idea of Atmanirbhar, which is the text of ancient Indian thought, has acquired extreme relevance because of the post-COVID world. That is what I would say. Because when we talk about Northeast, it is integrated with India. Without integral link with India through that 30-kilometer chicken neck, Northeast has no existence. India is not complete. So, when we talk about India, we talk about Northeast. And when we talk about India, we also talk about the world for three reasons. One, India alone has thought of the world. Only our seers, our philosophy has thought about the entire world. No other civilization has thought about the world except through its own glasses. We looked at ourselves through the world. So, when we talked about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we never said that the world will be without differences. We said the world will live with differences and it will live in peace with differences. It will not have them versus us approach. So, it has the philosophy. Second, even demographically, India was always connected with the rest of the world. Today, they say about 25 million Indians are living outside India. Each one of them having a connection of 10% means at least 1/5 of India is connected with the rest of the world physically, demographically. So, we are not separate from the world. Third, we have been a great trading nation till 1750. India was one of the most powerful economies, being first or second, first for 1700 years and second in the rest of the period. That we had always a global connectivity, global experience, global understanding, and so we never viewed our country as something in isolation. So, unless we influence the world, such a nation, the world will influence us. Unfortunately, in the last 200 years, that is precisely what happened. Without our capacity, with our capacity to contribute to the world coming down because of diverse reasons, including mostly politics, the world began influencing us disproportionately. And the consequence of it, I will try and trace it. But what is the context today? The context today is that a pandemic is changing the world. It is changing the world in such an unprecedented manner. It is not yet over. The pandemic is still on. The world is talking about the post-pandemic world. And the people who framed the current contemporary world order, they say the world order will change forever. I will tell you what is the world order today, contemporary world order, which is already shaky to the extent that it is almost collapsing. And what is likely to be the shape of the world order, nobody is in a position to say, including the very author of the contemporary world order called Henry Kissinger, who formulated the contemporary world order in 1970s. And this world order gives hope for the world about the future and a certain stability and certainty. If the world order, the contemporary world order, is not going to survive, you can understand how the world will think about its future, how any nation can think about its future, how any nation can think about another nation as its friend or enemy. There will be a total uncertainty, instability, and may even be chaos. So the future of the world, the future has become uncertain. So unless we understand how the contemporary world order emerged, we will not be able to understand from here where we go. The contemporary world order emerged from the post-World War, Cold War order, in which democratic nations, economically free nations, confronted the autocratic and communist nations. It became a wall between them, and that was Cold War. This is where huge changes began taking place because America overextended itself and found that it was in difficulties, and China, because of its exclusiveness, got into serious difficulties, and both of them felt it is in their self-interest to come together. China to break the communist dictatorship model and slowly move over to the American side, but not immediately. But America wanted the communist bloc to be broken. With the result, it was in their self-interest to come together. You know what? China had at that time only an atom bomb with itself. China's population contracted by almost 5 crores because of hunger between 1957 and 1961. It had nothing to offer except an atom bomb. I will tell you where India missed out and why. And so this whole changes between 1972 and 1992 put China in a very important strategic position with America and later with the West. With the result, in this very period, India lost out. China, with Marxian polity, entered into market economics. India did the reverse. We had democratic polity and Marxist economics. With the result, the world was not looking at us for 2 reasons. You are not market economics, and you are democratic because of that you are unstable. There is a certain chaotic thing. China was strong, stable. The West had no principle in interfacing, interacting, cooperating, promoting a dictatorship. And the cost of it they are paying now. But the unprincipled world order which developed from post Cold War as merely based on balance of power, that has come into question today. The world preferred China and neglected India. And the result has been on hand for the West today, which I will come to later. But we must understand where we lost out. We lost out because India's ambivalence to power, Bharat's ambivalence to power. This originated in Emperor Ashoka. Emperor Ashoka gave up the war, and so India branded itself as a country which did not want war, which did not want army, which did not want violence, which did not want power. But only one question it did not ask itself. If Emperor Ashoka had lost the Kalinga war and given up the war, he would never have been a hero for us to follow. Because he won, he became a hero. And he got into confusion after the war. And there was no one to remove his confusion. And that became the confusion and ambivalence of India towards war, towards army, towards power. India forgot another war. That is the Kurukshetra war. The mind of Arjuna before the Kurukshetra war was precisely the same as of Ashoka after the Kalinga war. He was in confusion whether to wage the war or not. Ashoka was in confusion. Why he waged the war? He killed so many people, turned people into orphans, widows, and all this Arjuna said before the war. But Krishna educated him about the need for war as a rarity. It's not a desirable thing, but it is an inevitable thing in the cause of establishment of order. This became completely absent because Krishna's message to Arjuna, which gave clarity for Arjuna out of the confusion before the war, was not available to Ashoka, whose confusion prevailed as the confusion of India itself. A wrong interpretation of war, a wrong interpretation of violence, a wrong interpretation of the need for an army. With the result, the first Prime Minister of India, when he assumed power in 1947, and the British commander came and asked him, "What is our defense policy?" He said, "Where is the need for an army? We don't need an army." The commander was stunned. So you can understand that India's ambivalence to power went to such extreme that we did not want an army itself. Within 3 months, the Prime Minister came to know of the need for an army. And in 1962, we knew what it is important to have an efficient army. This country was defeated roundly by China in 1962. Still, it did not learn the lesson because there was no understanding. The very beginning of Atmanirbhar is the capacity to have own power. You cannot live on borrowed power, whether it is intellectual, whether it is political, whether it is army, whether it is economic. You have to generate your own power. So the turn came in 1998 when India exploded the atom bomb. It stunned the world. In fact, I recall what Bill Clinton said at that time: a Buddhistic India is doing it. We were always a Buddhistic India. Did you ever take notice of us? Only after the atom bomb was exploded, the world began coming around us. Then they entered into a deal with us. They invited us to important meetings. What China had in 1970, India acquired in 1998. This is the most important strategic loss that India encountered in the manifestation of its own Atmanirbhar idea. You can never have Atmanirbhar as a philosophy in practice unless you have this power. And this power is a benevolent power. And India is the only country which said it will have atom bomb but will not use it first. No other country in the world said this because of its philosophy. The philosophy is not to hate others but to protect yourself. India's Atmanirbhar policy manifested in the idea of Ayodhya. Ayodhya never wages war, but nobody will wage a war against Ayodhya. This is the strategic defense power play of India, which India forgot for thousands of years because of the Ashokan confusion. It is not Ashoka's confusion. Victorious Ashoka's confusion was accepted by a defeated India. That is the main reason why India came to be a pushover till 1998. Afterwards, the things changed between 1999 and 2004. India grew so much. After 50 years, India posted the first current account surplus. India grew without foreign investment. India grew because of its own savings. India generated 60 million jobs, unheard of in world history, in just 6 years. This made the world recognize India as an emerging power, as an emerging economic power. This was the state in 2004. Unfortunately, in the next 10 years, about which I have spoken in different platforms, this was a decade of economic destruction. Destruction of the Indian will. I'll cite only 2 examples. We had our imports from China less than $5 billion till 2004. Afterwards, our imports from China began to leap 25 billion, 30 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion. So that Our current account deficit with India in China in 10 years became $175 billion, which is equal to three times the defense expenditure of China and five times the defense expenditure of India. India lost out. It not only we lost out in economic terms, we almost lost out in political terms in the year 2012 because the UPA almost decided to give up Aksai Chin, which is the disconnect between Pakistan occupied Kashmir and China. Otherwise, they will be connected. And it is at 24,000 feet high in freezing temperature from 1984. Our army is standing there to ensure that China and Pakistan physically do not come together. But that was precisely what was sought to be traded by the regime. But the army stood and refused it. You can understand how unstrategic, how weak, how thoughtless a rule that prevailed for 10 years. History will judge how the idea of India committed to Atmanirbhar weakened in this period. Then, from 2004, something very different began happening in this country because after 30 years, India acquired a single party majority. A single party majority and a strong leader. With the result, there is a total transformation in the world, and I will tell you how this transformation is now making India not only Atmanirbhar in its true sense of the term, in culture, in polity, in economics, and in geopolitics. And now the world is also beginning to look at India. This is the very idea that we should have got on to after we became free. But unfortunately, we began copying others, and nobody will look at you when you are copying others. And that is how India, for 65 years, became a follower of the world instead of being contributor to the world. We became a consumer of the world's generated ideas and contributed very little to the world. How the idea of Atmanirbhar was destroyed by the world. In 1951, the United Nations told all developing, all in those days we were not called developing nations, we were called underdeveloped nations. That unless you give up your philosophy, your values of life, your culture, and your sociology, you can never grow. Your desire for development will remain frustrated and incomplete, and you cannot have a standard of living like us unless you become like us, unless you accept one size fit all model policy that we are suggesting. This was imposed on the rest of the world. Our education system, our polity, our public discourse, everything was centered around this idea that unless what is the education member, India can never develop. This was the education system. This was promoted very actively. This is a combination of Max Weber and Karl Marx idea. This ran through, and the world itself experienced a shock. And in fact, globalization made it even worse. In globalization, the West presumed that it has finally won against the rest. It is the best for the rest to follow the West. And that is how the globalization idea was marketed. But fortunately, in India, the Atmanirbhar idea from the days of Vedas, from the days of Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Paramhansa, from the days of Mahatma Gandhi, from the days of Aurobindo, from the days of Lokmanya Tilak, till now, has been kept alive as a flame. So long as you have this idea as a flame, it is not an idea in the archive. It is in the idea in the background. So we had this Atmanirbhar idea, which was overshadowed by the darkness around, but still the flame was alive. And that's what I'm going to tell you how the flame has manifested. Without anybody knowing, in 2014, when the new government came in, it put in the Niti Ayog which it formulated in the place of the Planning Commission, which was modeled on the base of the Russian development, they said it's a beautiful sentence in that no model can be transplanted from outside India into India. No model can work in India which is transplanted from outside. We need what will work in and for India, and we need a Bharatiya model for development. So the seed for Atmanirbhar in the government thinking was laid in 2014 on the 2nd of January 2015, and that is now germinating. And how is it germinating? Because in the year 2001, when the WTC attack took place, in the year 2005, the G20 nations first came out with a declaration that there is no one size fit all model for the world. Every country will have to think of its own model based on its own conditions. What does it mean? They are saying that our model has failed. In 2008, the World Bank repeated this. In fact, the World Bank went to the extent of saying that we have been saying that there is one size fit all model. For an institution like us to disown that is a very painful experience, but we have to tell the truth that each nation will have to work out its own model based on its own conditions. They still don't use the word culture. It is the United Nations in the year 2001, 2011, 2013 said that there cannot be development without culture. From 1950, you look at 2010, 60 years they destroyed the concept of culture in development. But we did not give up. We had our faith, we had our experience, we had our empirical understanding of Bharat, where culture worked as the very foundation of development. It may not have been in textbooks, it may not have been in education, it may not have been in public discourse, it may not have been in government policies, but that was the reality. So now, with China becoming a massive challenge, how India fits into this alternative world order which is emerging? What will be that world order? Many people were dismissing India's democracy because India's democracy is not based on votes. India's democracy is based on a panchayat system which has been there for 5,000 years. When the Panchayati Raj bill was introduced in Parliament, the background inquiry commission which went into this issue traced the Indian idea of politics through consensus. It was not through votes, it was not through majority. It had a far wider acceptance, and that is why India had the least amount of violence. If you look at Professor Raman's study of the world in the last 2,500 years, India was the only country which had very little violence and no violence at all. When the world had maimed and killed 1.2 billion people in India, except the Ashokan Kalinga War, in which 100,000 people died, there was no other violence till the 13th century. It is because of our polity. Now, the Western liberal democracies constitute only 14% of the world's population. Indian democracy added, it becomes 31%. All democracies put together, it is 46%. The rest of the world, led by China, is autocratic. So the Foreign Policy magazine came out with a report in the year 2019, January, well before COVID, that India is the silver lining and golden lining of democracy. All liberal democracies are collapsing. The Central and East European democracies are ceasing to be democracy and becoming dictatorship. The world order will emerge around India because the world order has to emerge for democracy. Otherwise, there will be no free market, there will be no freedom, then the world will be in darkness. This is the choice before the world. The new world order will center around democracy, and democracy means diversity. And Western liberal democracies are failing because from 95% voting in elections, they have come down to almost 60%. In some countries, 50%. And less than 40% of the youths vote. Less than 45% of the minorities vote. Less than 40% of the educated people vote. Less than 40% of the low income people vote. It is the high income people, it is the highly educated people. It is the people who are occupying higher positions who vote in the democracy. But in India, it is reversed. 75% of the minorities, 65% of the OBCs, 70% of the scheduled caste vote. It is the higher caste people, it is the highly educated people, it is the people with high income who vote less in India. So the Indian democracy is bottom spread. This is being recognized in the world. The very meaning of democracy is changing from a liberal democracy to cultural democracy. This is the shift that is taking place in the world. These are all not our studies. These are the studies of the rest of the world, which are losing out because they have promoted hyper individualism, which has destroyed all sense of collectivism, without which there is no culture. So the culture-led economic model, which Vivekananda Kendra began explicitly articulating, of course, taking the seed idea of Mani Eknathji, it began doing it in 2001 in Northeast. Now it is becoming a global idea. So Atmanirbhar has very intense connections with Northeast because of Vivekananda Kendra. Atmanirbhar rests on cultural foundations, spiritual foundations, social foundations with economic output. Economics is an output. Economics is not the foundation of a society. If I am given a choice between my culture and money, the moment I choose money, I destroy my culture. But if I choose my culture, I have money also. So, the alignment between the collective idea of culture, spiritualism, society, philosophy, and economics is what India had taught to the world, and time has come for the rest of the world to understand the Indian paradigm as essentially the global paradigm. I think we have a very important job to do. I'm extremely happy that I could share these thoughts uh, in a very important meeting in which thousands of Karyakartas are participating. I would like them to carry forward this as part of their mission, not only for India but also for the world. Thank you very much.